Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast with Andy Turner and Garrett Fools, checking up on Texas policies and politics with some federal issues thrown in, like the assault weapons ban, interest rate hikes, you get it, but it's mostly Texas, since we can't ignore the big stuff either. And now, here are your hosts, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us this week and for tuning in and sticking with us. And we have Suzanne Bellsnyder with us this week. We will talk to her in just a minute about a couple of things. Rural broadband being first up. But for those of you who are looking for us, you can find us at facebook.com/seeingredpod. You can email us at hosts@seeingredpodcast.com, or you can find us on what is formerly known as Twitter at the Seeing Red Pod. As always, want to thank our producer, the Zipmeister, for volunteering and helping out. But we definitely want to hear from you guys, what you love, what you hate, what do you want to hear about? Let us know. We have utilized many ideas that have come in, and we're thrilled to listen. And if you email us, I promise you will get a personal response from me or from Garrett. So let us know what you think. And with that, Garrett, did you want to introduce our lovely guest?
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Yes, today we have Suzanne Bellsnyder with us. Suzanne's a veteran political consultant with more than 30 years of experience in both political and public affairs. She's worked on various Republican local, state, and national campaigns. She has managed administrative and fundraising strategies for nonprofit organizations, and she has served in various roles in state and local government. During her 30 years as a professional, Suzanne has worked at the state capitol, as a chief of staff, as a political consultant, and as an economic development director, as well as a city manager. She now resides in her hometown of Spearman, Texas, up in the Panhandle. She's an entrepreneur at heart. She owns Zulu Coffee Company, which is a boutique coffee shop with her teenage daughter, and is involved in her family's agricultural business. She runs a public affairs firm, High Plains Strategy, and she recently purchased her community newspaper, the Hansford Reporter-Statesman. She's recently launched a statewide news source focused on information about rural Texas. It's the TexasRuralReporter.com. And Suzanne was born and raised in the Texas Panhandle with a passion to work on projects that are beneficial to the Panhandle and rural Texans. So thank you, Suzanne, for joining us today. We have a lot to talk about, but that's one hell of a resume. How did you get started in politics to begin with?
Oh, yes. Okay. Hey, Garrett. Well, thanks, guys, for having me, Andy, Garrett. Way up here in the Texas Panhandle. I know we're quite a few miles apart, but I just was one of those strange children who always had a passion for political and government and politics and watching things play out. So I attended the University of Texas, which, is the heart, is where the state capitol is there in Austin. But I wasn't necessarily philosophically aligned with most of the folks at University of Texas, and so I quickly got involved in college Republicans there at UT. Enjoyed arguing with my professors quite a lot, which was a lot of fun. We organized the campus there at UT for college kids and had one of the biggest chapters in the country at the University of Texas, which is kind of fun. So just got a little taste of all of that there at UT, and then had the opportunity to work at the Railroad Commission that then led me to working in the Texas Senate. And that's sort of how I got just, I guess, sucked into this political world.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. And I kind of got sucked in too, but that's a story for another day. Garrett, you wanted to talk about a specific topic?
Yeah, we have the constitutional amendment elections popping up here in November, and I believe it's Proposition 8 that's going to be covering rural broadband specifically. I'm from an area that's more rural, but it's more ex-urban. It's about an hour and a half outside of Dallas. has its own TV station, but it's a really small one type situation. We've always had decent internet, but we're not really going to be someone that really going to have the same benefits to a plan like this. What are really kind of the rationales or the thoughts behind what's really the push for this rural broadband prop on the ballot, amendment on the ballot, and kind of what's your feedback as, being someone who is the rural reporter?
Well, so I think the biggest issue is to think about broadband as sort of a foundational resource that all communities need. Everything in the world runs on on the internet. It runs online. Even things like sprinkler systems for our large farms up here are now controlled by my dad uses his phone to monitor sprinkler systems. So it's just we drive tractors off of electronic systems that run off of different GPS and different things. So it's a foundational, it's like a utility, that we just can't live without from an economic development standpoint, but it's also, for healthcare, education. Those are two other foundational places that, rural communities just have to have, especially healthcare, the ability to, deliver healthcare without having to hop in a pickup and drive 2 hours to the doctor. Those are the kinds of things that are going to allow these communities to, continue to thrive. So that's why it's important. I often talk about rural Texas isn't necessarily a problem. We don't have problems, but we definitely need resources. And I think that broadband is really kind of the foundational start to that. So I'm glad to see Texas really stepping up, to deliver on that.
Yeah, and what you don't know about me is I'm a refugee from California East, which would be the state of Maryland. And at one time I was the legislative director for the State Department of Information Technology. So rural broadband, Maryland's like this big compared to Texas, but rural broadband, very, very much an issue. So while I don't know the nitty gritty the way you do, I know we had people, they would call us, they would call the governor and they would say, I got to take my kid to McDonald's in town, 20 miles away, for them to do their homework. This is a very real problem. And I didn't even realize, and I don't know why, but that there was applications for farming. That's fascinating to me. So, yeah. So, and I tell me if I'm wrong, but I expect this is a huge problem in far east and far west Texas. Yeah. So, and satellite ain't gonna get it. My husband is a guy that designs microchips, so I understand just a little bit more. But satellite doesn't get it, right? You need the.
Someone.
Go ahead.
Yeah, someone actually asked me the other day, challenged us on this broadband thing the other day, and asked me about satellite. Well, why can't you just get Starlink? And I said, well, think about, we have 8 sections of land that all have a sprinkler on them, so we're going to have 8 satellite systems. The maintenance, it's just not, while it sounds like a solution, it's not a feasibility to be able to just run things in that way. So yeah, it's foundational to us being able to continue. If the world hadn't changed, it was 1930 and we were still doing things one way and the technology hadn't changed, then maybe, but that's just not reality. So
and also, I'm not sure the upload and download speed from a satellite dish would be enough for you guys. It might be enough for little Janie or Joey to do his homework, but that's about it. They say, oh, streaming. Yeah, well, no, not so great.
Well, and you think about these rural communities, and when I talk about, I say rural, that's kind of a term that we all like to use, but when I say rural, I'm 45 minutes from the closest Walmart. That's how rural we are up here. So, but these communities they're delivering food, they're delivering fuel, they're delivering fiber to the world. There may be only a few hundred people out here, but what we're doing is significant to the world. So So while, we often think about cities and how we address those problems, I mean, these problems have to be addressed, and if they're not, it's going to have a really huge impact on the, the economy.
I mean, you're effectively leaving them in, like, I don't want to say third world, but
yes,
you're effectively leaving them back in the 1930s. So,
True.
I mean, it is a very serious problem. So I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. Let me make that really, really clear. But I wanted to go because to my mind, it's like, who in the world would be against this? So I did a little research and to see who on earth would be against such a thing. And of course, in the Texas Tribune, they, of course, had a piece about why this is so terrible. And it boils down to their complaint is small rural broadband companies won't be able to compete. And my first thought was, first of all, according to the article, and check me, you feel free to tell me where I'm wrong. I am fine with that. But first of all, so what's the alternative? Wait another 5 years? Second of all, they're only requiring 25% down to apply for the grant. If you don't get the grant, you get the money back, right?
I truly don't know all the nuances of how the programs are going to work. I haven't really dug that deep into it, but the bottom line is, I'm sure that when we expanded telephone service across the state, we had the same types of arguments. But what's great about America and American businesses is that they usually figure out a way to adapt and move forward. And there is there's some, we actually have our service up here is a company called PTCI. It's actually an Oklahoma, Texas company. It's amazing the things that they're doing, and they're not, an AT&T. So, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, these companies, the good ones will figure out how to adapt and get a piece of this pie. So,
right. And
the most important part is the build out. I think we get too caught up in who's going to do it and all that, but that's for the policymakers, I guess, or the regulators, the bureaucrats to figure out. But the bottom line is, none of that should be a reason why this proposition should move forward,
I absolutely agree. I think it's necessary, and we can't. And you were talking about telemedicine. I mean, for many people living in far-flung places, where the Walmart is 45 minutes away, I don't know how long it's going to take you to get to your doctor. But having those telemedicine consults, I mean, sometimes you just do have to go in person. You just do. But I have to tell you, I've recently been doing some telemedicine with one of my doctors, and it's like saved me time and energy and money, and it makes everybody's life simpler. And they're in and out in 5 minutes, and I've had plenty of time to answer the question. I get answers to the questions I need, and they get the answers they need. So, yeah, I mean, you have a whole population there who needs telemedicine, who needs decent speed, and by that I mean not satellite, decent speed internet for just basic education. I mean, look what happened during COVID, right? And I don't even know what they did with the schools at that point with no internet, but I know in the communist state of Maryland, they were all on Zoom. And I know my girlfriend worked for the State Department, and she was stationed in Riyadh at the time, and her children went to the British school, and they were on Zoom. So, and I don't know why Zoom, maybe they have some educational, this is not an endorsement for them. It just happens to be what education was using. But what do you do and you live well north of me, so snow is an issue for you, right?
Yes, we have snow every year. We have real winters here up in the Panhandle, so yes.
Yep, that's what my husband tells me, because he's from kind of all over the country, but yes, he is Boston. He went to school in Boston. His father and his mother live in Syracuse, New York. So, and I spent many years in Maryland. So yes, I understand, are my kids going to school today? Like, I got to listen to the radio. And, so these are all, there are many other reasons, and I'm sure you could list them off. You talked about public safety at one point when we were off air. Do you want to talk about how rural broadband affects just basic safety?
Well, it's just, just goes back to the same, kind of concept that, you have to, it's an infrastructure issue. So, we actually struggle with, one of the things that is a challenge up here is emergency response, because, when there's a town like Spearman of 3,000 people we don't have a TV station. We get the news from Amarillo, which is 90 miles away. So an event that happens, in our backyard, we literally don't have access to, any kind of emergency information. We attempt to, set up text messaging or phone lists, but, and some of that works, but it's also, how do you reach people in an emergency like that? There actually was a large, pretty devastating tornado in Perryton. I don't know if y'all saw the coverage of that, but that was a situation where literally their siren system ran off of a button that you had to push at City Hall. Well, City Hall got hit by the tornado, and
oh, no.
That tornado went through town with no notice to the community. So there's some real, issues like that that I think that, a really great system, as broadband as an infrastructure, there's a lot of really great things that can be built upon that around, especially emergency management and those kinds of situations. So it's a whole different world up here. I mean, it's hard for people to, I always say there's basically two Texases now. We have rural Texas, which is what everybody wants Texas to be, Yellowstone and, that kind of, concept of, but that's really, land mass. It's a lot of places, but Texas is very urban anymore. And so you're really dealing with two pretty different ways of addressing issues in Texas. But I think broadband is one of those that we can all kind of come together on, because it is sort of foundational. Yeah, one would think. Well, that's true. We've always got our detractors, don't we?
Give me a rough number. How many Texans are, and we say not served, but we also say underserved, by this problem? I mean, are we talking like several 100,000? How many Texans, like roughly?
I would say probably 3 or 4 million.
Yeah, because I had heard a number, and I just wanted to know, if it was the close to 5 million people that I had heard. Yeah,
probably. Because it's when you look at it based off of, because there's a lot of places that are urbanized, like closer to the border, that are slightly urbanized and are urbanizing, but are still considered, or still need this help with this rural build out because they just have been underserved, right? So when you look at that non-served and underserved number, there are a lot of communities like that get included into the tally. They get that number up to 5 million. But also you keep in mind, Texas has about 30 million people. Most of them live in the triangle between Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston, or within a county of that triangle.
So basically, 30 million people, and we're talking about 5 million who are underserved, meaning that maybe they can get like low speeds, but good luck with that, or they can't get it at all. So that's 5 million out of 30. So that's what, Garrett, help me, 15%?
About 18%.
And for those of us on gig speed, we don't think about it, but man, if anybody's ever had their internet go down, now think about living that way.
Yeah.
Like fully living that way. I mean, I have neighbors who have, security cameras that they can.
I think Suzanne could speak to it where there's times where the telecom just goes out and it's like it's out for a day or two, and it's down. There's nothing you can do about it, just because the wind blew the wrong way in this particular area.
Yep. And our neighboring community, there was an outage a few days ago. They were completely they had no communication with the world. It was an AT&T outage for 2 days, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but like the school didn't have, the school was out, the government was out, like, just everything. And yeah, they got a little taste of what it would have been like to live back in the, back in the old days. But I think that's when you realize how dependent everything that we do is, on the internet. But for me, it's just, I get so frustrated.
If anybody doesn't really still is like, why is this a big deal? What do I care? I've got what I need. Go sit out on your porch tonight. Leave your phone inside. Have nothing connected to the internet. Just go sit out there. Don't touch your phone all night at all. Good luck, because we use it for email, we use it for text. We do everything, and God forbid, somebody took my laptop and my Apple Watch and my phone. Man, I'd be in the desert. I don't know what I'd do. So, if I am grateful for what we have, but now we need to give it to others.
There's an organization I follow. There's a former staff member of ours actually worked for them, and then now she's up in DC doing some other stuff on broadband. But it's Connected Nation Texas, and if anybody has any questions about like some of the statistics that we're talking about, it's a great place for information. We connected our folks and did a lot of their studies, because a lot of what Connected Nation did is they helped the federal government sort of figure out, or the state government figure out some of these pieces, which is what led to the development of these grant programs and the actual funding for this broadband proposition. So there's a lot of good information out there if anybody's wanting that.
So so let's make sure they get the website again. What's the website again?
connectednation.org, and then there's a Texas link there.
Okay. There's also, and I'll try to remember to put this in the notes, but there's also texasbroadbandnow.org, and there is a full study available on there.
So we have rural broadband on the amendments. There's a number of others, and we're not going to go into any of the others, but there's a lot of that's going to be going on. And then the way the amendments get passed through the legislature is you have to have at least 2/3 vote of both chambers. They usually end up with like near unanimous totals for everything, but there seems to be a little bit of consternation with this go around on some of the items. So they, get out and vote for the propositions, the ones you want to support or ones you want to oppose. Definitely want to plug the constitutional amendment election there in the first week of November. That said, there's also going to be a lot more fights going on in the Texas legislature, because the governor has indicated that he'll be calling a special session here at the beginning of September, or the beginning of October. Sometime. We're not sure when. It'll be in October. He's giving the legislature a break. I'm not sure it's much deserved, but it's definitely one that they're taking full advantage of. So that's going to be focusing on school choice, vouchers, the end of public education as we know it, whatever the case may be. They're going to be taking on whether or not monies follow kids to different schools or not, in one capacity or another. There are different. The House couldn't quite get there in the regular session. What are your kind of thoughts on just school choice generally, but also how you think the session might play out?
Yeah, so, well, I've sort of had an interesting journey with education and school choice in particular. I worked for Florence Shapiro, who was education chairman. So we've been, we were in the trenches on a lot of things that, have transpired over the years with education. Interesting thing about Florence is she actually was the lone Republican to vote in committee against Robin Hood back in the day. So she has a very interesting journey into education and was really there from sort of the beginning. But
would you want to explain real quick what Robin Hood is? Because a lot of folks aren't really. You'd probably be the good person to talk about it.
Yes. Well, I don't know the nuances of it, but it is basically, it's the school funding system where, some of the wealthier schools, the money is, moved from the wealthier schools and sort of moved into the not so wealthy schools. And that's like based on property wealth. It has a sordid history. The legislature tried to, it was back in the early 90s, late 80s. The legislature tried to pass a school finance, scenario for Texas. The courts kept striking it down. And actually, this is interesting that this is all being talked about now, because I know that Paxton brought some of this up on Tucker Carlson the other night and didn't exactly share the correct information, but as I listened to it. But in the end, the legislature finally were able to pass a system that the courts, felt was, equity and things like that. There's some funny little terms that drove a lot of that conversation. But for the regular person, it's basically, if you're in a school that has a lot of property wealth, you're likely giving some of your money is actually going to other places, and you're not getting that as much as maybe you think you should. So I think that's kind of the layman's way of saying it. It's a lot more complicated than any policy wonk would say. No, that's not. There's a lot of pieces to it, but
it's not exactly right. But it's a good way of explaining it, the general terms to folks.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of the general terms. You probably don't even want to know all of it. So, and that's for a whole nother show, right? A whole nother discussion about public school financing. But Bush, when he was governor, education was a huge part of his platform. And so that was when kind of this idea of school choice started, in my opinion. And back then, school choice was sort of a piece of a pie to improve public education. And while I love Governor Abbott and I love our leadership pushing school choice now, I don't believe that they're pushing it as a piece of the pie. I think that they're pushing it as an alternative to public education. And I just don't think that's where we need to go as a state. So I think that's the philosophical problem that that's not being talked about. Of course, everyone wants kids to have choice in school, but we cannot abandon our public schools. It will absolutely destroy Texas if we do. Rural schools in particular, our entire communities are built around these schools. In a lot of cases, they're the biggest employer. Everyone's mother or sister or mother-in-law or sister-in-law or, work at the school. In some way, the school is, kind of a major player in everyone's lives. We don't deal with the stuff that you hear about with the book banning and some of those things. I mean, we're not dealing with those issues. We see our school board members at the, post office and the grocery store and the football game, and we're able to talk about, issues. So I think this is where this whole idea of the two Texases really plays in, because, a solution that takes money out of the public school system is not going to be a good solution for all of Texas. And unfortunately, all the proposals I've seen, it feels, like that's not what they're doing, but it really is what they're doing.
Well, okay. So here's where you and I diverge. But again, and I've been beating this drum since we started this podcast, just because we don't agree on one particular policy item doesn't make me less than, doesn't make you. I hate that everybody calls everybody a rhino if they don't agree on one particular issue. So mad respect. I mean, I was part of the team that got, permitless carry through and this and that and the other thing. And I had people calling me and going, what are you doing? The world's going to fall apart. And God bless everybody. We live in America. You are entitled to defend your position. And I think it's great. My background is not only do I have a master's degree in education, not only have I taught in both Catholic and public schools, not only have I fostered children, but I have also adopted children. And to that I will say, if Anthony is not listening this week, he's in trouble. So my son listens. My son claims to listen every week. We'll see. But here's my thing. Each of my children required something completely different. My oldest child, Anthony, brilliant writer, even in 7th grade, really talented writer. The public school that he would have had to go to wasn't going to give him the background that I felt as a former educator, somebody who studied this to some degree. I mean, kind of a substantial degree. And so I sent him to a non-Christian private school because they had a Latin curriculum, right? And we were reasonably certain that he was going to end up doing something like having a career, whether that was college, apprenticeship, or military. We wanted to set him up. My middle child, who doesn't listen to the show, and gets dogged about it, lives in North Dakota, so maybe, that's a different thing. But he was not ever going to be, he hated school from the word go. He never had fun in school. He didn't enjoy. And so for him, I was hoping that by sending him to the public school, that maybe there would be something in Votech that would attract him, right? So that would be, that was the right place for him. And then my younger daughter, after about 3 weeks in the public school, because, Suzanne, I don't know if you have children, but you certainly have friends with children. And you know how 8th graders are. No, Mom, I have to do it this way. You don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, I kind of do, but all right. So then was begging to go to a different school. And so because I wanted her to have more exposure than we had provided her to religion. And also I wanted her, she's smart as a whip. And I wanted her ready for college. So we sent her to St. Peter and Paul. Now, again, this was not in Texas. Sorry, guys. But each child deserves the school, in my opinion, that fits their needs the best. And I live now in Bastrop County, and my husband and I have no children in the school system. My oldest is 33, my middle child is 28, and my youngest is in college. So we're paying to the school system. And if my neighbor wants a voucher so that she can send them to, not the local public school, I'm okay with that. And I read the UT article, okay, because I do love my Longhorns. Didn't go there like y'all did. But I did read this article, and they were like, well, you're taking money from the public schools. And it's like, well, if there are less children in the public schools, then you won't need as many resources, right? So you're sort of letting the parent choose. And some parents may decide that homeschooling is entirely appropriate. Believe me, I gave long thought to homeschooling my kids. And then I was like, we're going to get to algebra, and then I'm hosed. So,
right. I think I agree with you, and I think all of that makes sense if you live in the city. But when you live in Spearman, you don't have choice. You have one school that you can go to.
And so then vouchers wouldn't be any good there.
Well, except for, I mean, the voucher, yes, itself, but what the impact of, you say that there's no additional if a kid leaves the school, then there's no additional resources, but that's not necessarily true, because the utilities don't change. The cost of running a school doesn't necessarily change with, if a few students leave. You're going to have the same, you still have kind of the same overhead cost, especially in these big, these districts out here. It's incredibly expensive, to do anything, because we only have, I think we have 700 kids in our, I think there's 700 kids in our district. I think that was it. We actually lost like 60 kids this year. I can't remember exactly what the numbers were, but that's we still have, the cost to run the school, but the loss of those students impacts our funding. So my biggest concern is that the state takes their eye off the ball. We've got to keep improving public schools. That has got to be our focus. That's the state's responsibility. The state's responsibility is, to provide education to all the kids. And so that's my biggest concern, is that we do that. But then the second piece of it is that there's only one pot of money for Texas public education. And the more straws, pulling out of that pot, that pot shrinks, and that is going to impact, and it's going to impact rural schools proportionately, because we don't have any other place to go. We have to show up at Spearman ISD because there is literally no other option. The families that don't, like what our schools are doing, they, some of them will go. Our little county has 3 school districts. So there's some of that where you can shift over into a different district, but that is the extent of choice options for us. Yeah.
And then something else I wanted to add is, I think that there's two competing issues for me when I look at school choice generally, and I'll try and tie it back to rural, but I just wanted to speak about it more generally, is that school choice becomes an issue, is become an issue because a lot of our public schools have failed, and we are looking for alternative ways of figuring out how to educate folks in systems where the public school system just doesn't work. Now, the public school system seems to work really well in rural areas because that's kind of where it was developed originally, and it seems to prosper in that regard. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are still places where it does work, but there are places where it doesn't, and we need to figure out ways in those areas for it to work. So school choice is a way. Whenever we're looking at this, we're looking at HISD failing to the point where they had to be taken over by the state. Like, that's a whole other issue we may talk about in its own right, but this isn't the first time a school district has failed like that. Beaumont failed a number of years ago. Lamarck ISD failed and got absorbed by nearby. Wilmer Hutchins has failed and was absorbed by Dallas ISD. There are these different districts that have failed, and when it's localized, there are ways in which the state can do it. But when it's system-wide, and it's a larger district like HISD, the largest in the state, like, you have to look at these issues kind of as how they represent the whole, and we have to figure out a way that we can help kids. Now, like, to go back to those Robin Hood fights in the 90s, you mentioned before, there was the courts kept getting involved and saying there wasn't enough representation or dollars weren't going in the right direction one way or the other. So you're going to always have that court impetus as well, where things not only have to be done, but they have to be done fairly. You can't really just localize something via the state in order to get that through the door. So I'm to the point where I think that we have to try something to fix these schools, and there might be some blowback in these communities like Spearman, but there isn't definitely going to be a blowback in a community like Spearman because, to your point, they don't really have an option. So, like, it's not as we're not going to really see. I'm interested to see where that money goes. But conversely, and here's my issue as a conservative with this problem. I look at higher education. I look at the Pell Grant system. I look at subsidized student loans and how they impacted me, but also how they impacted prices over the past 40 years of higher education costs. This money that follows the kids' private schools just is going to be good for the first generation of students, and then over 5-10 years, those private schools will adapt and their tuition will just go up, and will still cost the family $40,000. The school will get $50,000, and it's not going to really change much. Like, it's just not going to really help the way we hope it's going to help. Like, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work. The private entities will get their dollar, and they're going to maximize it. And, like, all this other stuff, I haven't seen anything why this isn't different than higher education. And that is a massive boondoggle.
That's not how that works. Private schools don't. I mean,
No, I mean, how does it not? How, I mean, because if I'm talking, like, if I look at Harvard and I look at the University of Texas, and I look at what their tuitions were in 1980.
But they're not Harvard and, well, first of all, who was it? Garrett, help me. It's the economy, stupid. Who said that first?
It's James Carville.
And it really is about the economy. So the dollar in 1980 is different than the dollar in 220.
Yeah, but it's risen above by the rate of inflation by like an order of magnitude. What's happened in higher education is that you take the state dollars, and now you have to incorporate state. They hire more administrators because now there's more requirements on the administration.
You have vouchers for college here?
Yeah, it's called the Pell Grant. It's called the Stafford Unlimited thing. Those all, if you take any federal dollar for that type of thing, if your students take those federal dollars, there's Texas grants as well that also can be accepted and are accepted. I mean, it's the same principle. Is that there are state requirements that come with those dollars. If you give an organization $10 million, it's $10 million they don't have to raise, or they can have an extra $10 million in their organization. It's just the nature of how money and finances work. So we can talk about how the funding system in Maryland works, and it's going to be done this way, and there's budgets and the whole budgeting process. It's similar to that, the way in which a company would work, and they both have that dollar amount they have to get to, or that burn rate they have to stay under. But that cost will go up. If it's subsidized by public dollars, it's still going to go up eventually. Because there's more money, because those families can still afford to, because those families who are going to private school can typically already afford to pay $40,000. If they're getting an extra $8,000 from the state, they can still afford that $40,000, and it's going to be $48,000 going to that school, because that's what the market dictates.
That is a really important point in all of this, in my opinion, is so I do have a daughter. She's actually at University of Texas.
There you go.
Hook 'em.
So she graduated. So she yeah, exactly. Hook 'em. Big time in our house. But she attended school until 4th grade. We attended Regents, which is a really nice private school in Austin, for 2 years, or actually 3 years. And then her 4th year, we went to public school there in Austin. And then we moved to Spearman, and she finished out her, education in Spearman. She finished second in her class, or third in class, and was in the top 10%. So she got into UT, and then was accepted to Macomb. So she's like a perfect example of a rural kid that can just basically go, take over the world. And so that,
so
yeah, and she will, just wait. She's amazing. So during COVID, this child, that's when we started our coffee shop. She had this idea to renovate this school bus, and we started a coffee shop out of a school bus during COVID. That was her
Very
big
cool.
thing. So I know, she's so cool. So, but that's my mom brag moment. But
Absolutely.
But the issue is, in terms of what Garrett was talking about, is knowing what the cost of private education is. Most families aren't going to be able to utilize this for that reason alone, because, Regents, I think back then it was $12,000 a year. Well, $8,000, doesn't get you all the way there. So I think there's some issues with that piece of it as well. But I think it's just, again, I'm going to go back to kind of the philosophy behind all of this. Is the state's job is to provide education to everyone. And so how do we do that if we start letting a certain group of kids exit the system? Then do we quit paying attention to the rest of them? And that's my biggest concern, and I think that's where rural Texas is really coming from on this. Is when you allow, kids to leave the system with our taxpayer money, and that's the other piece of this, is that I'm all for school choice, and we did it. We went and paid the money that we, had to put our daughter in private education, because that was a choice that our family wanted to make. We worked extra to make it happen. So, I mean, people have that option now. It's the use of the state dollars, the limited state dollars. Every year we're fighting for more, funding for schools and doing the right things. That's where the concern is that when we pull this, kids out of the system, then we stop worrying about the system and we stop worrying about the kids in the system. And I really think that, as much as anything, is where I personally, have a lot of red flags with the current proposals on the table. I'm not saying there isn't a solution, because maybe there is, and there is a way to do this and accomplish, the goals. But I'm just really concerned about, I know there's a national movement on school choice taking place right now. Texas prides itself in being a conservative state, and we're embarrassed not to be at that table. And that's where Abbott and some of these guys are coming from. They're not putting kids first in this, and that's where we've got to change. We've just got to change the discussion. I think public schools will come around for school choice options, but not this way.
I think this is absolutely something we need to get done, and we need to get done quickly. I hope they can figure out some of the concerns I have about the money being fungible and how it will chase the kid or follow the kid, however they say it, wherever they go. But I do think that we have such a big problem with such a large number of students in these larger districts that have failed, that we have to figure out something that can address that in the short term. But I think, to kind of circle back to what we talked about at the beginning, Robinhood was supposed to be a short-term solution as well, and we've had it for 30 years. So I do have concerns about creating another boondoggle and then being tied up in the courts for 20 years and then basically the same thing happening again. So I have some real reservations about it. I do think that the legislature needs to get something done in the special session and kind of put the issue to bed for a little bit, and then start tweaking it again and keep tweaking it as things go along. That's kind of where I fall on the issue. Just so I wanted to make sure, because I feel like we have three different points of view here, and that's great.
Yeah, kind of.
That's kind of emblematic of this issue and what a lot of issues are.
And I want to be really respectful of Suzanne's position on this, because nobody's got a magic wand to go poof, this is a solution. But Garrett, because we talked about this 7,000 times off air, that I feel very, very strongly about this. But I think I'm going to let Suzanne have the last word on this, and then we'll close out the episode because she's our guest. And as you wind up your thoughts for the day, Suzanne, what else would you like to share?
And include any plugs for yourself that you'd like.
Oh, any plugs? Okay. Well, I just I think the reason that I started this rural Texas newsletter is because I want this rural perspective to be a little bit stronger and a little bit more ingrained in the conversation. I think there's we assume that Texas is Texas, but there's a lot of different things happening in Texas. The rural urban divide is a huge deal. And though all of those factors need to be taken in, I want all kids to be successful in this world. And I know education is foundational to that. So, just because rural Texas may not be supportive of the options on the table doesn't mean that there isn't a solution, that can work in both scenarios. And so, that's where I'm just kind of, I feel like this is rushed and a little pushed forward for maybe reasons that aren't, everyone's not really being completely upfront about. But then I also know there's folks in this fight that have been doing it for 30 years and pushing for this since the Bush days. So I respect everybody's kind of opinion and where we're headed, because we do have to have a strong education system in Texas. It's important for economic development. It's important for livelihood. It's important for, the next generation and, furthering of families and operations.
Success. Just
success. Exactly. Across the board. Exactly. So I don't want, anyone to feel like I'm absolutely, no school choice ever. That's not where I'm coming from. I want school choice, and I want it done the right way, to where we're thinking about all the kids and how this is really going to truly impact education in Texas. So,
well, I hope you will absolutely come and join us again, because this has been a delight, and it is a rare thing when I get to have a little mini debate with somebody on the show. So for me, this has been a ball.
Fun.
Yeah. So I hope you'll come back and maybe, during special session, when this really heats up and we get some details of what's going on, we can have you back. And in the meantime, you and I can both go do more research. But Suzanne, if people want to find you, I know you're running a couple of companies. Which ones would you like to promote?
Well, so the project that we're really working on growing right now is this TexasRuralReporter.com. The concept is it's going to be kind of an online newspaper. We do a weekly clip service where we're providing, clips coming out of rural Texas. And then we're going to feature some articles and opinions from folks that are actually living and working in rural Texas. So I'm hoping it'll really grow. It's a brand new project that I literally just launched, and so we're sort of plugging folks into it. I had an article, I keep telling my daughter I went viral. I didn't really go viral, but I got a lot of exposure for the site this week on my opinion on the Paxton situation. So that's really where we're going to grow. So TexasRuralReporter.com.
Okay, great.
Everybody can join and follow what we're doing.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to having you back, and this was really so much fun for me. But anyway, so I want to thank Suzanne Bellsnyder. Y'all don't forget, you can find her at TexasRuralReporter.com. And if you want to know more about rural broadband, that would be at connectednation.org. Thank you all for tuning in this week. Garrett, I know you have been under the weather. I hope you start feeling much, much better very, very soon. And thank you for dragging yourself into the podcast today, you poor thing.
Well, it's a pleasure to join everybody. Sorry I didn't get to talk as much, and if I was super nasally, now you know why.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.